probably put it in on Desmos. Agree?
Yes.
Okay, so let's see. So my Strep boy, you said you have both of your assignments that you missed done? Strep boy. Is that right?
Is that what I'm going to call for this evening?
Huh?
Struggling?
Yeah. But don't worry. Don't worry. Okay. I'm still trying to look who's going to be Mr. Farm Fresh Egg Boy. We also have Cupcake and Sunshine. I haven't handed out yet, but you'll be Strep Boy. I'm sorry. If you're offended, I apologize. You might be in the wrong class. Yeah. All right. So my thought is. Julia, did you have page 103? Verbal is fine with me. You got it? Cool. Verbal's fine. Okay. So let's talk about, let me just kind of run through a little bit of what the homework had to offer. So when we're doing the, what are we working on? Histograms? When we're doing the histogram on Desmos, it's any of these things, like on page 107 of the homework, you can list all the wins and look at a histogram of that. You can look at all the losses. You don't look at them together. Does that make sense? You could look at the winning percentage, the games behind. You could list that. You could even list what place the teams are in, but it looks like you're missing top two. You could even do it as far as the attendance goes. Okay, so those are all things that histogram is going to work real nicely with. What students struggle with the histogram a lot of times is kind of the labeling. Okay, so the histogram is going to basically look something like this. Correct? So let's just pretend I drew those with the same width, and we're all set. We good? All right. So usually down here, this would be, if we were looking at the wins, and the y-axis is really how often. Okay. So each one of these histogram bars, if this was labeled between these two numbers, let's say this was 20 and 30. So we'd look at games of 20 up to 29. Okay, if you make it to the right. If you have it to 30, that means that the 30 falls into this first category. Okay, so on and so forth. There's not really a right or wrong if you include the endpoints to the left or the endpoints to the right. Just keep it consistent with your graph. But if you had done a histogram and you had your histogram as everything was 5 wide, and your neighbor had everything as 5 wide, and you included, the let's say this number right here, let's say this is 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70. So if your neighbor included 21 through 30 to count there, but you chose to keep it as 20 to 29 for that, you're both correct. Okay, but the histogram is going to look slightly different. Does that make sense? It's working in my head, but unfortunately my mouth is getting in the way. So my point on the histogram is, if we had something like this, if we wanted to make a histogram with this, and we wanted to count it by 2s, okay, so let's have the one neighbor that says, I want to have everything to the right. So everything to the right would be here, so this would be up to 3. Okay? But if your neighbor was like, I only want to have this, that means that your neighbor's histogram is only going to go up that high. The data is still there, and as you progress through the list, let's see if I can do this right. So that means that this guy would have 3, 4, so there'd be 2 of them for this one. But then the guy in the blue wants 2 and 3. This one by default would work the same because it's the same piece of data. If you were to look at it, what's going to happen is if you included 1 to 9 as data points and you're counting it, and your neighbor did it from, or you want 0 to 9, you counted that, but your neighbor went from 1 to 10, they will have some of their columns be higher or lower than yours. It doesn't mean it's incorrect. So that's a big thing to realize. Just don't count the endpoints, meaning the endpoints. Like here, the 2 would be an endpoint, the 4 would be an endpoint. Don't count it twice. Don't count 2 in this column and this column. Count it in one or the other. I think that made sense, but you have to tell me. Is that okay? Oh, I didn't take attendance. Who's not here? Everybody? Let's see, attendance. And so just a reminder while I'm doing this, tonight is back to school night. Do I get to meet family members? I meet your family member, your grade drops 77%. I'm kidding. It's 80%. Okay. Happy to meet parents. Don't worry, I won't embarrass you. If you show up with your parents, I won't embarrass you. I won't put you on the spot. Cool. That's one person. All right. So, was there anything that you saw as far as the Desmos histograms that you need help with? Can I do anything for you, or are you okay? Let me know. Does anyone want me to run through a Desmos real quick? Okay. So, and I saw this yesterday. Can't remember if it was this class or my other one. Somebody, excuse me, had loaded the Desmos scientific calculator, which is also free. Make sure you have the Desmos, I believe, on the phone. Y'all can make fun of my phone if you want, but it works for Stirrup. So, do you have that Desmos, the one that's here? Do you have the green? Do you have that green one right there? Yep. Do you have that green Desmos? Yes. Cool. Okay. Sweet. Ooh, I have 16 messages. Okay, my friends in Arizona, I swear to God, they don't work. Get that. Yes. And you voted this, right? Cool, yeah, that's it. You got it. It's hit. Did you get the green one? Did you get the green one? Green. Green. Oh, yeah. You get the green one. And you both got that green one. Cool. All right. So, the student had the scientific calculator. It doesn't have this part of the screen. It has this, so it looks very similar, but it doesn't have the. So just make sure. We're just double checking if we had the Desmos. You have the one that's a green. It looks like a graph and a white with a white graph. Okay. So, all right. So that's obviously the most important thing. The next important thing, I also saw this as a problem. Okay. Line number 1, you have to name what you're going to name your list. I named it capital L. Okay? You might say lowercase l. You might call it something else. Whatever you call it here, you're going to do the same. So let's see if let's say I'm just going to call mine capital K. Okay? And I just have to remember because I can't remember the top of my head. I'll post it here. Now, if anything on technology gets goofy on a test or quiz, like you're not seeing something work, you didn't get it wrong, ask me. I'm not going to take points away. So let's say I'm going to name my list. In this case, I'm going to name it K. So I'm going to go K equals, and then I will do square bracket, and I will separate everything in the square bracket. All right, should we do wins, losses, percentages, games behind, or attendance? No, let's not do attendance. What do you guys feel like? Let's do percentage. I saw the PCT. So if you did percentage, I need you to think about this. So 0.420. 0.407. 0.457. 0.395. Comma 0.451, comma 0.512, 0.568, 0.457, 0.552, 0.469, 0.414, 0.420, 0.457, 0.451, again, so errors you would make on this, you might forget to put a comma, you might forget to put the decimal, which you would see when your data, if you forgot it, because you'd have if you forgot the decimal, you'd have something in the 4 or 500 range that's showing up, and these are all decimal amounts. Got the last one, 414. Okay, so I have the data in. So then in my next spot, answer spot number 2, I can either type in the word histogram, make sure you spell it correctly, or you can find histogram. So histogram. And then, once it turns from like the italicized letters to bold stand up, that means that's one of the functions that is going to work. One of the things that will work on this. So then we have to do list. Now, list. And what did I name my list? I named it capital K. Okay. So something will show up originally. So take a look. We only have 2 bars. So now we want to talk about how much each bar length should be. So I'm going to go comma. Being that everything is 0.4 or 0.5, you want to make your list work for you in a certain region. Now, you could have done this histogram where you didn't include the decimals and you just had the numbers, and then that might have worked for you, but then you'd have to go and search it, because if you didn't have the decimals, you're talking about 4 and 500. So right now mine is listing from in the X direction from -10 to +10. So So let's just think, how would we maybe want to make our thing? Do we want to make them each 0.2? 0.2 shows that. Is that good? Are we seeing enough data? Or do we want to see more? Maybe we change it to 0.15. Maybe we change it to 0.08. So now it's looking like there's 3 bars, and you can start zooming in on it. And of course, you have something that's pretty tall. And Desmos isn't always perfect on it, but so that seems it's getting a little bit better. Maybe let's change this to 0.05, 0.002. Oh, that might be a little bit better to look at. So that's definitely a histogram. The hard thing with it is, yeah, you can come down in here and do this, but you might have to play around with it because Desmos, you know, if you just by squeezing it, it's going to change it. Obviously, we have 2 very tall categories. So that 0.02, I can't give you the guarantee what works. Just know that if your stuff is going in as decimals, that you want your width to be a decimal amount as well. You don't want it as a whole number. Okay? If I went back through my list and I eliminated each of my decimal points, and all I'm doing is just now this is going to give us the same type of histogram. It's just going to be out in the hundreds. So we have to go find it once we get it plugged in there. And it's not wrong to do this. Again, when you are that statistician and you are trying to put together something, you want something to be easy on the eyes to see. Remind me next time not to have, 30 pieces of data I put in. Okay, now I'm gonna go down here, type in histogram. We called it K, and let's make each one 100. So now I have to kind of go find it. So you can zoom out, and then we can zoom in on this. This looks like a pretty good histogram right now. Maybe we can make it a little bit bigger. Maybe let's change our K value to 0.7 or 75s rather than 100. Okay, that looks like a pretty good looking histogram as well. You might have to play around with it. We obviously have 4 bars. Maybe we change this to 50. So again, we're just changing the widths of things to see what our data is going to look like. Okay, and that's all with the comma. So the big mistakes I saw is if I labeled my original capital K, some people were putting, say, lowercase k, whereas histogram, and it wasn't finding it because capital K and lowercase k are they're the same letter of the alphabet, but one's capital and one's not. So we're just looking at make sure the labels are there. Friends, do you feel comfortable with this? Okay. Now on the quiz, if I say, hey, make a histogram, I would say jump onto Desmos right away. Make the histogram, and then try and draw it as best you can. If you look at this histogram, now this is 350, this is 400, so that's probably about 375. 375, this is probably 425. This is probably 475. This is probably 525. This is probably 575. Just label that, and then you can talk about how many times it happens. I don't know what I'm doing in the Y direction now, so I would have to, I can't do that. If I wanted to figure out how tall things are, because I can't see my Y-axis, you just kind of have to look at it. You might have to count But the nice thing is when you have a histogram that's done for you, how tall is this region here? I don't know. And I can tell you on the quiz tomorrow, it's not going to say, hey, how many games fell into your first column? I'm not going to ask that. But if this were to be drawn correctly, your y-axis is over here, and perhaps over here you're listing it as 5, 10, 15, 20, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or whatever. So that's just how often those games are happening. I have the winning percentage between 375 and 425, or I guess 424 in this case. How often is this going to happen? Because Desmos is going to default having this number. This region here would go from 425 up to 474, and then this region would be 475 to 525 or 524. So it already does a manual default, but it does it for you. Now, some things for the quiz for tomorrow. The quiz tomorrow, I think it's 7 or 8 questions total. 4 of them, I believe, maybe 5 of them are multiple choice. Okay, is your half sheet of paper coming together? Do you have things that you feel comfortable? They might say, hey, what kind of information, what kind of graph would you use if you had quantitative or qualitative, or which graph would not have quantitative, and it'll have a list, and you have to pick. So make sure you have those definitions on your half sheet of paper so you can refer to it, because that's an important portion. Variables, sample, observation, anything that's underlined, quantitative and qualitative, you definitely want to have those definitions down. Writing the whole definition, is it going to help you to have the whole definition that's on page 1, or can you kind of paraphrase it into your own words? It's your choice. I can't tell you which is the better to do. I would think using your own words about quantitative might be helpful, okay, rather than writing down a whole paragraph, okay? Other things, that quantitative has discrete or continuous. Realize what types of things would be discrete, what would be continuous. Discrete things would be like if you're able to count. Discrete can have decimals, but it has to be a terminating decimal. And honestly, it's really hard to decipher what continuous data is, because we have some really accurate stuff, but we don't know for sure. If I wanted to say, what's the distance from Earth to the sun, I could say, well, it's roughly 93 million miles. Is it exactly 93 million miles? No. Using some of the math, we could say, okay, I know what the speed of light is. It takes the speed of light exactly this much time to get here, but is my time actually exactly that? Because my timepiece, even if I had a fancy stopwatch that takes it out to the hundredths doesn't mean it's necessarily continuous. But think about time itself. If I say, hey, this person ran a race in 10 seconds, was it truly 10 seconds, or was that 10 seconds bound by the stopwatch that had to round at some point? Stopwatch had to round, but theoretically, a person running a race or running a marathon, it didn't happen at that exact moment, okay, because our timepieces had to stop. But if I said to you, hey, how fast could you run a mile? If someone came up with something that had infinite decimals, which it's impossible, but in theory, if you had something that had infinite decimals, someone might say, yeah, I can run a mile in 5 minutes, 31 seconds. Well, what about the microseconds and the microseconds? There's a certain characteristic that changes. They try and, we've probably seen some sort of swim meets. If you ever watch the Summer Olympics, they have swim meets. I mean, they carry it out to 2 decimal places. Oh my gosh, this person won the race by 0.01 of a second. Was it truly exactly, well, based on that timepiece? But, you know, if you're timing things, it has to be continuous data because the time is taking place. If it didn't, everything would look like a strobe. Okay? Meaning, you know, if we didn't see time as a fluid thing, we would all be choppy people. It'd be, you know, you'd see my hand, rather than making a nice fluid motion, it would be stopping and pausing. Blink really fast and watch somebody walk. You're going to see some different information. Other things to know for your sheet, you know, you want to know, you know, how you're going to, you know, on page 4, categorical data. Categorical data, we use a bar graph. We also use a pie chart. You know, the pie chart, you know, if your items add up to 100%, that means your pie chart's going to do well. A pie chart works with percents. Okay, that's really important information. And then know why data might be misleading, because if you have a 3-dimensional pie chart, that's misleading. Though it does look appealing, nice. You know, you're trying to get your point across. The majority of people want to know what your point is. Okay, statisticians want to know this is kind of bad. Know how a histogram has to be connected where a bar chart isn't. Bless you. So that is the long and the short of everything that we have. Now, I could say, you know, let's do the review on page 105, but I don't know if it's necessarily worth it. I mean, I could say, hey, let's do busy work on page 105 and 106. Is that going to be helpful for you? I don't know. But I think what might be more helpful is if you were to turn to page 105, 106 and just kind of glance at any of those questions and see if there's anything that I could answer for you where I'm not going to collect it as an assignment. I'm not going to check it off as an assignment. It's just there for you. Is there any of those questions that you would like me to justify? And I'm happy to give you, you know, discuss how the answers would work. Is there anything on, say, just page 105 itself, 1 through 7, that you need more clarification on? If you have the answer to it, it might be good to write on your half sheet. Anyone see anything there? So if you're able to answer any of those questions on page 105 by having your half sheet of paper because you have the right definitions on there, that's good. And then page 106, yeah, we have a big old dissertation to read that leads along with those questions. And again, a lot of times when you are writing out your verbiage on an answer, your answer might be very correct, even though your answer might be very different than your neighbor's that also might have a very correct answer. So it's one of those that I have to kind of go through and read. And again, there's nothing about the tests or quizzes in here that should bury you. You have that half sheet of paper, you should be set. I would strongly encourage you to be filling out that half sheet of paper now. Don't fill out half sheet of piece of paper, you know, 23 hours from now, where you're trying to cram it all in. I mean, compare with your neighbor. If they have a half sheet, compare what they have. Maybe you need to add what you need on yours. Okay? But the rest of the period's yours to get that half sheet. You can ask me anything you need to know. And I saw